Hi, I'm Danny with TriPoint Refrigeration. Today we're going to talk about some of the tools of the trade that we use in the air conditioning and refrigeration world. Here I've got 2 vacuum pumps, some gauges, some vacuum hoses, some micron gauges, and a Klein screwdriver that has a Schrader core remover tool. So specifically we're going to talk about vacuums and why we need to pull vacuums and how vacuum pumps work to some degree, and then the proper operation of a vacuum pump. So here on my right, I've got a Yellow Jacket Super Evac Plus 2 11 CFM vacuum pump. This is one of the brand new DC motor brushless vacuum pumps. On my left, I've got a Yellow Jacket VP85 8 CFM vacuum pump. Both of these are great options for pulling vacuums in the refrigeration industry. So one of the things I want to talk about is how to start up a vacuum pump, how to use a vacuum pump, how to shut down a vacuum pump. Because I run into, with new technicians, I run in a lot where their vacuum pumps just don't work very good. It takes forever to pull a vacuum, and it shouldn't. And so one of the big things that we need to understand about vacuum pumps is there's oil in these vacuum pumps, and the oil needs to be changed after every time you pull a vacuum. And in some cases, depending on the systems, you might have to change the oil in the middle of the vacuum, which the fill piece makes it really easy to do that. The Yellow Jacket also does too. So one of the other things that we need to make sure that we're using is vacuum hoses. So over here we have a 3/8 inch vacuum hose. There's no Schrader core depressors inside this hose. So, and it's a much larger diameter hose. It makes it a lot easier and a lot faster to pull a vacuum. So the other thing about vacuum pumps that causes people issues is they forget to change the oil, or they don't even know that they need to change the oil. So always change your oil after every vacuum, number one. But number two, they don't start up and shut down the vacuum pump properly, and it ruins the seals inside the vacuum pump. And then the vacuum pump just never pulls a good vacuum. And so the proper operation, I'm gonna demonstrate on this new Yellow Jacket vacuum pump here. The proper operation of the way to start up this vacuum pump is, turn that where you can kind of see it. So there's a few components here let's talk about real quick. So we have the exhaust port. And so this is where you actually fill the oil. And believe it or not, this is actually a garden hose thread. So if you don't want the exhaust to come out in the building wherever you're at, you can actually hook a water hose up to this and run it outside. But this is where you fill the oil. Over here we have 2 ports. We have 2 3/8 inch vacuum ports, and we have a 1/4 inch vacuum port. Over here on the right hand side we have a gas ballast, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then we have an on-off port that isolates the vacuum pump and the oil from the intake ports, and it isolates the vacuum pump from the intake ports. So you can use that if you're going to change the oil. So when we're starting up one of these vacuum pumps, the first thing we want to do is we want to open up the isolation valve. So vertical is open. And then we want to open up one of these 3/8 ports. You can do the 1/4 inch too if you want. But we'll open up one of the 3/8 ports, and then we turn on the vacuum pump. So the DC pump is not like the AC pump. So the AC pump's going to come on immediately and just start going. The DC pump takes 3, 4, 5 seconds. So when we turn it on, it doesn't do anything. And you'll hear it in a second. And then as soon as it gets going, it's going to start spraying oil out of here. So you're going to put this cap on. Okay? Now, at that point, we can go ahead and isolate this pump and just let it run, and it's going to be okay. And so what we did is we started this vacuum pump where it's not under any pressure, and it's under an atmospheric pressure, and allows it to get going without putting a lot of pressure on those seals. And once it gets going, this pump will just run like this, and it's totally fine. Now, I like to let my pump run for 5 or 10 minutes before I start my vacuum, because it allows the oil to warm up inside the vacuum pump and allows us to pull a better vacuum faster. So at this point, you would take your vacuum hose and you would hook your vacuum hose up to a set of gauges if you have to go through a manifold. Better than going through a manifold is if you can go directly onto the condensing unit that you're pulling the vacuum on. Now, Heatcraft, they have 3/8 ports on their condensing unit, so you can pull a direct vacuum directly from your vacuum pump, and that's the best way. One of the best ways. If you want to get even better than that, hook up some copper. Flare a copper line and run a 3/8 copper tube to the condensing unit, and you're going to pull a really good vacuum. Now, we typically don't do that on traditional refrigeration condensing units or air conditioning units, but when we install racks or work on racks, we'll do that on a rack because you'll get a much better vacuum that way. So anyway, at this point, then what you can do is you can go ahead and take this cap off. You can hook up your vacuum hose here, and you can open up this port, and it'll start pulling a vacuum here. So that would go to your system, and you turn it on, and you let it pull that vacuum. Now, one of the things that we haven't talked about yet that is the most important part of pulling a vacuum, if you don't use this tool, don't even worry about pulling a vacuum. That's the micron gauge. So we've got 2 micron gauges here. This is a filled piece MG44, and this is the Testo 552i micron gauge. And both of these micron gauges are fantastic. This one is independent. It also works with the filled piece app. And this micron gauge goes to the Testo gauges. So you can hook this one up and read your microns directly in your gauges. One of the things at TriPoint, every technician that works for our company gets a brand new set of Testo 557S gauges with the micron gauge. And they are required to use these to pull a vacuum when they're working on systems, so that we can verify that we're getting the proper vacuums that we should on systems. So on this vacuum pump, we were doing some testing with this vacuum pump oil earlier, and the oil is full of moisture because we were pulling a vacuum on some water. And so, I don't know if you can tell in the video, but the oil sight glass is down here, and it's real milky. And that milky milky oil in there is an indicator of moisture present in your oil. So I put the micron gauge on here, and I'm going to go ahead and open up the vacuum pump. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my micron gauge. There we go. And so we can see we're already pulling down. We're at 598 microns. Now this vacuum pump will pull this thing down to 10, 15 microns, but the oil in this vacuum pump is really, really, really dirty. And so we're not going to get there, but we are going to change this oil, and we'll do this experiment again, and we'll show you that. But this is what we're looking for. A vacuum below 500 microns is what we're looking for whenever we pull vacuums on our refrigeration systems. Once we get below that 500 microns, then we want to do a decay test, and I don't want to see it rise above 1,000 microns in less than 10 minutes. If we stay below that 1,000 microns in 10 minutes, then we're in good shape to go ahead and start charging our refrigeration system. So, if I was out in the field and I'm running and this is on a vacuum and everything's good and I'm ready to break my vacuum, this is the next spot where people damage their vacuum pumps by not shutting them off properly. So typically what you see is, oh, we're good to go. They're going to isolate their gauges or isolate the system, and they just turn off their vacuum, and what they've done is they've turned their vacuum where the whole system is still in a vacuum. And that's going to damage those seals inside the vacuum pump. So what you want to do is you want to isolate the system. So if you're using gauges to pull your vacuum, you isolate your system by closing all of your ports off. And then go to your vacuum pump and open up one of these ports, and you can hear it change. Once you hear that change, then you can turn off the vacuum pump, because what you've done is you've allowed the vacuum pump to get up to atmospheric pressure, and you're not going to ruin your seals that way. Okay, so there's one other thing to talk about with the vacuum pumps. And this is probably the most commonly misunderstood thing on a vacuum pump, so we're going to explain exactly what it does. So, over on the side of the vacuum pump, we have a gas ballast. On the filled piece, we have a gas ballast. That gas ballast is back here. I don't know that they make a vacuum pump that doesn't have a gas ballast. So what this gas ballast is for is whenever you start a vacuum, we open up that gas ballast. because it allows the vacuum pump to suck the moisture and contaminants out of the refrigeration system, and it evacuates them out of the gas ballast and bypasses the oil in the vacuum pump. And what that does is it preserves the oil so that the oil has more lifespan while you're on a vacuum. We do have to close this gas ballast, but when we close this gas ballast, we want to close it when you achieve between 1,000 and 2,000 microns of vacuum. So once you get below 2,000, between 1,000 and 2,000, you just close that gas ballast, and then what it does is it pulls all of the moisture and any other air left in the system through the oil of the vacuum pump, and allows that oil to absorb that moisture and air and non-condensables. And so that will preserve the life of your oil, preserve the life of your vacuum pump. That's what the gas ballast does. It's really, really important. So now that I'm done, I close up, I put caps on all my vacuum pump, make sure they're all nice and tight. I don't have to Superman it, but just finger tight is plenty good. And then I want to close this valve here to where it's perpendicular to the inlets, because that isolates the oil in the vacuum pump from the rest of the system, and it keeps that oil from bringing in and absorbing any moisture or air in the system while it's riding around in your truck and things like that. So it keeps that oil in good shape, so that, hopefully, what we like to do is after I finish my vacuum, I like to change my oil, put it back in my truck, so my vacuum pump's always got brand new oil in it, so it's not riding around with all these contaminants in this vacuum pump. And then when I need to pull a vacuum the next time, I know I'm ready to go, I've got new oil, and I'm not having to wait 10-15 minutes to change my oil. So that's how these vacuum pumps work. The filled piece is the same way. So you've got your exhaust right here, which is this exhaust. You've got your fill port here, which is the same. Your oil fill here, which is the same as the exhaust on the yellow jacket. You got your gas ballast over here. Cool thing about the yellow jacket, or about the fill piece, is if you open up this little door, this is where the oil is, and then you can take this thing out, and it's got another one here on the back. And so you can keep brand new oil here, and you can pour it in, you can dump the old oil out, and you can change the oil really fast with this vacuum pump even while it's running. So that's one of the really nice things about this, even though it is only an 8 CFM. So that about does it for the different vacuum pumps and how we use them and how you should use them. They're quite easy, but if you don't follow these little steps, man, you can run a vacuum pump in no time. So if you have a vacuum pump that, man, it's just not pulling very good, try changing the oil. If you want to know how good it's working, go ahead and hook up a micron gauge directly to the vacuum pump and turn it on. If it doesn't pull very low, change the oil and do it again. If it doesn't pull very low after changing the oil, you've probably got ruined seals. You can order new seals and take this apart and fix it yourself, or you can ship it back to Yellow Jacket and they'll do it for you and ship you back a refurbished vacuum pump. But if you follow these few little processes, you'll never have a problem with your vacuum pump. It'll last you decades. So anyway, so I'm Danny with Tri-Point Refrigeration. If you have any questions about vacuum pumps or how to pull a vacuum, or if you need a vacuum pulled on your system, give us a call. We're located in Lubbock, Texas and Austin, Texas. Our phone number is 512-651-4565, or visit us online at www.tripointrefrigeration.com.